Historical records indicate that life within the Mughal imperial harem was governed by a complex hierarchy shaped by proximity to the emperor, lineage, political utility, and the shifting rhythms of court favor. Contrary to later romanticized depictions, the harem functioned less as a secluded realm of luxury and more as an administrative and political institution, embedded deeply within the machinery of imperial governance. Women within this space occupied clearly defined ranks, ranging from imperial wives and royal mothers to concubines, attendants, servants, and enslaved women captured or purchased through established networks across Central Asia, the Deccan, and beyond. The loss of imperial favor did not merely represent emotional disappointment. It often carried material, social, and political consequences that could redefine a woman's existence within the imperial court. Contemporary accounts describe how entry into the Mughal harem frequently occurred through systems of diplomacy, enslavement, tribute, and elite marriage alliances. While some concubines gained prominence through intelligence, artistic talent, or the birth of children, many remained dependent on imperial attention as the primary determinant of their security. Surviving documents suggest that stipends, housing arrangements, and access to personal servants were directly tied to rank and favor. When that favor diminished, the redistribution of resources could be swift and unmistakable. The architecture of the Mughal harem itself reflected this stratification. Chroniclers noted carefully separated residential quarters, guarded corridors, and layers of internal administration overseen by senior women and eunuch officials. Women who enjoyed the emperor's attention often resided in apartments closer to central courtyards and gardens, spaces associated with ceremonial visibility and symbolic proximity to power. The gradual withdrawal of imperial interest frequently resulted in reassignment to more peripheral quarters, a change that carried both practical and symbolic meaning. Distance from the emperor's physical presence translated into diminished political relevance, fewer opportunities for patronage, and reduced visibility within the court's internal networks. Legal codes of the period reveal that concubines were not without recognized rights, particularly if they bore imperial offspring. Mothers of princes occupied an elevated status that could shield them from sudden displacement. However, for concubines who did not produce heirs, or whose children failed to survive infancy, a common occurrence in early modern courts, the stability of their position remained precarious. Chroniclers observed that the Mughal court was characterized by intense competition among women seeking security through patronage, alliances, and the cultivation of influential intermediaries. The loss of favor often exposed the fragility of these arrangements. Administrative records indicate that financial stipends constituted a primary mechanism of control. Allowances determined access to clothing, jewelry, food quality, attendance, and participation in cultural life within the harem. When imperial attention shifted elsewhere, these stipends could be reduced, delayed, or reassigned. Such adjustments were not always formally recorded as punitive measures, yet their impact was tangible. Surviving household inventories suggest noticeable differences in textile quality, personal possessions, and domestic resources among women of varying status. Material reduction functioned as a quiet but effective indicator of diminished standing. Contemporary observers also describe the emotional environment created by these hierarchies. The Mughal court emphasized discipline, decorum, and controlled conduct, limiting overt expressions of rivalry. Nevertheless, letters and court memoirs imply that isolation, anxiety, and uncertainty were persistent realities for women who experienced declining favor. Without imperial attention, access to social gatherings, artistic patronage, and educational opportunities could narrow considerably. Musicians, poets, and artisans who once circulated within a favored concubine's quarters often redirected their services toward rising figures within the harem. The administrative structure of the harem reinforced this transition. Senior female officials managed daily logistics, dispute mediation, and communication with the emperor's broader court. Their decisions could significantly influence the comfort or hardship experienced by women whose rank had shifted. Surviving documents suggest that these officials balanced compassion with adherence to protocol, prioritizing order and stability over personal attachment. Women who lost favor, therefore, encountered a bureaucratic environment that rarely acknowledged individual distress, focusing instead on maintaining the equilibrium of the imperial household. Political dynamics beyond the harem further shaped these outcomes. The Mughal Empire operated within a framework where alliances, succession concerns, and factional competition intersected with domestic life. Chroniclers noted that shifts in imperial preference sometimes reflected broader political calculations rather than personal sentiment alone. A concubine associated with a declining noble faction or a disgraced court official could experience reduced favor as a consequence of external events. Conversely, the rise of new alliances often elevated previously marginal figures, reinforcing the fluidity of status within the harem. Religious and cultural expectations also influenced the treatment of women whose positions weakened. Islamic legal traditions recognized certain obligations toward enslaved or dependent women, including provisions for maintenance and protection. However, implementation varied according to imperial priorities and household economics. Surviving legal commentaries indicate that while outright expulsion from the harem was relatively uncommon, forms of internal marginalization were widely practiced. Reassignment to less prominent roles, reduced participation in ceremonial life, and increased seclusion could occur without violating formal norms. Memoirs from imperial women and later court historians describe another dimension of this experience: the gradual erosion of influence over information. Access to news, correspondence, and political developments represented a form of soft power within the harem. Favored concubines often maintained communication networks through attendants, eunuchs, and visiting relatives. When favor declined, these channels could weaken, leaving individuals increasingly detached from the decision-making processes that shaped their futures. Isolation was therefore not solely spatial but informational, reinforcing dependence on the goodwill of intermediaries. The presence of charitable and religious activities within the harem offered limited avenues for maintaining dignity and purpose. Historical records indicate that some women redirected their energies toward patronage of religious scholars, charitable kitchens, or educational initiatives for younger attendants. These activities allowed them to cultivate alternative forms of respect that were less dependent on imperial attention. However, the scale of such endeavors remained constrained by available resources, which, as previously noted, were often diminished following the loss of favor. Age represented another critical factor. The Mughal court placed considerable emphasis on youth and reproductive potential, shaping patterns of imperial interest. Chroniclers observed that as women aged, their roles frequently transitioned toward mentorship, religious devotion, or administrative assistance within the harem's internal hierarchy. For those who had already experienced declining favor, aging could accelerate marginalization, particularly if they lacked strong familial connections or influential offspring. Surviving pension records suggest that while basic maintenance was typically provided, the quality of life could vary widely. Instances of voluntary withdrawal also appear in historical sources. Some women, faced with diminishing prospects, sought permission to dedicate themselves to religious practice or to reside in charitable endowments associated with the court. Such decisions reflected both personal agency and structural limitation, illustrating how individuals navigated constrained circumstances with the tools available to them. Chroniclers noted that these withdrawals were often framed in terms of piety and spiritual focus, aligning personal transitions with socially respected narratives. Despite these challenges, it would be inaccurate to portray all concubines who lost favor as powerless victims. Surviving correspondence and architectural patronage reveal examples of women who retained influence through family ties, economic acumen, or strategic relationships within the court. The Mughal harem functioned as a dynamic environment where negotiation, adaptation, and resilience shaped outcomes as much as imperial preference. Nevertheless, the overarching reality remained clear. Favor constituted a central currency within the imperial household, and its withdrawal carried consequences that extended into nearly every aspect of daily life. European travelers, Persian chroniclers, and Mughal administrative sources collectively suggest that the experience of losing favor was less dramatic than later fictional portrayals, yet more enduring in its implications. Rather than sudden expulsion or overt punishment, the process often unfolded through gradual reduction of resources, visibility, influence, and mobility. This quiet transformation allowed the imperial court to preserve stability while continuously reshaping its internal hierarchy. As imperial attention shifted across decades marked by succession struggles, territorial expansion, and administrative reform, the lives of women within the harem reflected these broader currents. The fate of concubines who lost favor illustrates how personal experiences were inseparable from political structures, revealing a world where intimacy, governance, and power intersected within carefully regulated spaces. Surviving records, though fragmentary, consistently indicate that beneath the opulence associated with Mughal courts existed a system defined by discipline, negotiation, and the persistent awareness that proximity to power was both a privilege and a vulnerability. Waiting for your signal to continue. Surviving documents suggest that the internal economy of the Mughal harem played a decisive role in shaping the lives of women whose imperial favor had diminished. The imperial household operated with a highly organized distribution system that regulated textiles, jewelry, stipends, servants, and daily provisions. Administrative registers indicate that these allocations were not merely symbolic markers of prestige, but practical determinants of autonomy. A reduction in resources often meant diminished capacity to maintain attendance, participate in gift exchanges, or sponsor cultural activities, all of which were essential mechanisms for sustaining relevance within the court's social framework. Chroniclers noted that gift exchange functioned as a subtle form of political communication inside the harem. Favored concubines frequently received luxury textiles, perfumes, and ornaments from the emperor, which they in turn redistributed to attendants, musicians, and intermediaries. This circulation reinforced loyalty networks and facilitated information flow. When imperial favor waned, the contraction of these exchanges could lead to gradual erosion of personal alliances. Contemporary accounts describe how attendants often gravitated toward rising figures within the hierarchy, not necessarily out of disloyalty, but as a pragmatic response to shifting opportunities and security concerns. The Mughal court's reliance on eunuch officials further shaped the lived experience of declining favor. Eunuchs served as administrators, guards, and conduits between the secluded quarters of the harem and the external court. Surviving correspondence indicates that their cooperation was essential for maintaining communication, arranging purchases, and managing petitions. Women who retained strong relationships with influential eunuchs sometimes mitigated the effects of reduced imperial attention, preserving access to news and material support. Conversely, the weakening of these relationships could deepen isolation, reinforcing the structural boundaries of the harem's hierarchy. Contemporary observers describe how education and cultural literacy offered another avenue for sustaining dignity after the loss of favor. The Mughal harem was known for its engagement with poetry, calligraphy, music, and religious scholarship. Imperial women often commissioned manuscripts, participated in literary gatherings, and sponsored recitations. Surviving manuscript dedications reveal that some concubines, even after their political visibility declined, continued to cultivate reputations as patrons of learning. This intellectual engagement provided a measure of social respect that did not depend entirely on imperial intimacy, though it rarely restored the material advantages associated with favor. Legal codes of the period reveal that the concept of manumission, or formal release from enslaved status, was occasionally applied within the imperial household. Concubines who bore children, demonstrated loyalty, or received imperial recognition could be granted a degree of legal independence. However, surviving legal commentaries indicate that such recognition did not automatically translate into political influence. A woman who had been manumitted but no longer held imperial attention might possess greater personal autonomy while simultaneously experiencing reduced access to court resources. This paradox illustrates the layered nature of status within the Mughal system, where legal standing and practical power did not always align. The question of succession politics intensified the vulnerability of women whose favor had faded. Mughal succession was not governed by strict primogeniture, leading to frequent competition among princes and their maternal factions. Chroniclers observed that the fortunes of concubines were often tied to the prospects of their sons. When a prince's political standing weakened, his mother's position within the harem could decline correspondingly. In cases where a prince died young or fell out of favor, his mother's support networks might dissipate rapidly, leaving her dependent on the goodwill of senior imperial women or administrative officials. Surviving memoirs from the reigns of emperors such as Akbar, Jahangir, and Shah Jahan indicate that royal mothers wielded considerable authority, often acting as mediators, patrons, and political advisors. For concubines who never achieved maternal prominence, this pathway to long-term security remained inaccessible. The loss of imperial favor therefore exposed structural inequalities within the harem, where motherhood, lineage, and patronage intersected to determine resilience against marginalization. Women lacking these protective factors frequently encountered a gradual narrowing of influence that could persist for decades. Economic records further suggest that some women responded to declining favor by cultivating entrepreneurial activities within the confines of the harem. Textile production, embroidery, perfume preparation, and small-scale trade operated as informal economic practices supported by the imperial household's demand for luxury goods. Chroniclers noted that skilled concubines could generate modest income through these activities, enabling them to maintain a degree of financial independence. While such endeavors did not restore political standing, they contributed to personal stability and allowed individuals to negotiate their circumstances with greater agency. Religious life within the harem also provided structured avenues for coping with diminished status. Historical sources describe regular participation in Quranic recitation, charitable distributions, and observance of religious festivals. Women who experienced declining favor sometimes intensified their involvement in devotional practices, aligning themselves with respected ideals of piety and restraint. Endowment records indicate that certain concubines contributed to waqf foundations supporting mosques, shrines, or charitable institutions. These acts not only reflected personal belief, but also functioned as strategies for securing lasting recognition beyond the shifting dynamics of courtly attention. The spatial organization of the harem reinforced patterns of social interaction that could either alleviate or deepen marginalization. Architectural studies suggest that while peripheral quarters signaled reduced prestige, they did not necessarily equate to complete isolation. Shared courtyards, bathhouses, and marketplaces within the imperial complex facilitated ongoing contact among residents. Women who demonstrated adaptability often forged new friendships and support networks in these spaces, illustrating the persistence of communal life despite hierarchical constraints. Nevertheless, proximity to ceremonial areas and imperial gardens remained a visible marker of status, continuously reminding residents of their relative position. Contemporary accounts from European travelers, though shaped by limited access and cultural misunderstanding, consistently remark on the disciplined order maintained within Mughal harems. Their observations, when read alongside Persian and Mughal sources, suggest that overt conflict was carefully managed to preserve the dignity of the imperial household. Women who lost favor were rarely subjected to public humiliation. Instead, the system relied on controlled adjustments that minimized disruption. This approach reflected the broader Mughal emphasis on stability and decorum, where the appearance of harmony was integral to imperial legitimacy. The passage of time could alter these dynamics in unexpected ways. Surviving documents indicate that changes in imperial leadership often prompted reevaluation of household hierarchies. A new emperor might restore stipends, reassign residences, or extend patronage to women previously marginalized under his predecessor. Such shifts were not guaranteed, yet they highlight the fluid nature of status within a court defined by succession and political transformation. For some concubines, patience and endurance proved to be pragmatic strategies, preserving the possibility of renewed security even after prolonged periods of obscurity. Illness and health care represent another dimension of the lived experience documented in imperial records. The Mughal court maintained physicians, midwives, and herbal specialists who served the harem's residents. Favored women typically enjoyed priority access to these services, while those of lower status relied on shared resources. Medical treatises and court expense logs suggest that declining favor could affect the speed and quality of treatment received, particularly in cases requiring expensive remedies. This disparity underscores how hierarchical structures influenced not only material comfort, but also physical well-being. Family connections beyond the court sometimes provided alternative support systems. Concubines originating from influential noble families or regional elites could maintain correspondence and receive assistance from relatives, mitigating the impact of reduced imperial attention. Conversely, women who entered the harem through enslavement or distant tribute networks often lacked such external ties, rendering them more vulnerable to isolation. Surviving genealogical records illustrate how lineage functioned as a protective factor, shaping resilience within the fluctuating environment of the imperial household. The cumulative evidence suggests that the loss of imperial favor was rarely a singular event, but rather a gradual process embedded within the broader rhythms of Mughal governance. Chroniclers repeatedly emphasize negotiation, adaptation, and the maintenance of personal dignity as central themes in the experiences of these women. Their lives reveal a system where power operated through subtle adjustments rather than overt rupture, reinforcing the continuity of imperial authority while quietly redefining individual trajectories. As decades passed and imperial priorities shifted between military campaigns, administrative reform, and architectural patronage, the internal world of the harem evolved alongside them. The experiences of concubines who navigated declining favor illuminate the intersection of personal vulnerability and institutional stability, demonstrating how the Mughal court managed intimacy as a component of political order. The historical record, though fragmentary, consistently points toward a reality defined by patience, constrained agency, and the persistent effort to maintain relevance within an environment where proximity to power remained both protective and precarious. Waiting for your signal to continue. Surviving historical evidence indicates that the later lives of concubines who lost imperial favor were shaped less by dramatic rupture and more by gradual integration into quieter roles within the imperial household's enduring structure. The Mughal court, characterized by its emphasis on continuity and administrative order, rarely permitted abrupt displacement that might destabilize the carefully managed environment of the harem. Instead, women whose prominence declined often experienced a steady transition toward positions defined by routine, reduced visibility, and limited but stable maintenance. Administrative pension records suggest that the imperial treasury maintained obligations toward women who had resided within the harem, regardless of their current rank. These stipends, while modest compared to those granted during periods of favor, provided essential provisions for housing, clothing, and food. Chroniclers noted that this system functioned both as a demonstration of imperial responsibility and as a mechanism of control, ensuring that former favorites remained within the institutional framework rather than forming external alliances that could complicate court politics. The continuation of financial support therefore reflected pragmatic governance as much as benevolence. The role of senior imperial women remained particularly influential in determining the comfort and security of marginalized concubines. Historical records repeatedly highlight the authority exercised by figures such as royal mothers, senior wives, and experienced administrators within the harem. These women oversaw dispute resolution, distribution of resources, and the supervision of younger residents. For concubines who had lost favor, cultivating respectful relationships with these senior figures often became a crucial survival strategy. Contemporary accounts suggest that displays of humility, service, and discretion could foster a degree of protection, softening the practical consequences of diminished imperial attention. Architectural patronage within the Mughal Empire provides additional insight into the long-term trajectories of certain women. Inscriptions and endowment documents reveal that some concubines, even after their political influence waned, participated in the sponsorship of mosques, gardens, waterworks, and charitable residences. These projects were typically modest in scale compared to imperial commissions, yet they allowed individuals to assert a lasting presence within the urban and religious landscape. Surviving Waqf records indicate that such patronage offered both spiritual merit and social recognition, reinforcing identity beyond the fluctuating sphere of courtly favor. The management of memory and reputation also played a significant role in shaping these experiences. Mughal court culture placed considerable emphasis on decorum, restraint, and the preservation of imperial dignity. Chroniclers rarely recorded personal conflicts within the harem in explicit detail, reflecting a broader tendency to maintain the image of internal harmony. As a result, women who lost favor were often absorbed into the background of historical narratives rather than publicly condemned or celebrated.